Hi everyone, my name is Mark Moykins from Big Mountain Studio. I'm here to help you ascend that big mountain of development knowledge. So subscribe and click that bell icon down below so you can get notified when I come out with new videos. In this video, we're talking about customizing section headers. As you can see now on the screen, we're using the default section header, which is just that light gray background and a label. It's kind of boring. So what we want to do is what's there on the right. But before we get into it, let's update our tasks. Okay, I'm in Bitbucket. We're looking at our board of all of our tasks. And we already did this. We created a screen where we show the days and the activities, but nothing's formatted yet. We just have the data showing. That's usually the first thing I do when I am developing an app is I just get the minimum done to show the data, make sure that's working. And then I customize and like to dress things up. So the prototype is already approved from my patrons, so that's good. Now our next task, I know it says customize section headers and rows for days and activities, but I was going to originally do that, but it was looking like it was going to turn into a long video, so I wanted to shorten it and break it out. And I also like to break out my videos, so it's just like one topic per video. So if someone's looking for just how to customize section headers and they find this, it's not overloaded with a bunch of other information. I try to do that anyway. I know sometimes it doesn't always come out that way, but I'm trying. So let's edit this. And let's take out this part right here. Yeah, we're just going to customize the section header on the days and activities view controller. Okay. And let me copy this. All right, we'll close that, save. And let's add another activity down here. Paste that in here. And instead of section headers, we're just going to say rows. Customize the rows on the days and activities view controller. Okay. And I'll move this up. This will be the next video that I do. Okay, and this is what we're currently working on. All right, great. Okay, so let's take a look at our mockups that we had and that my patrons were choosing from. And after a couple of changes and surveys, my patrons have decided on which mockup we want to go with. And it's this one on the right. Now, the others were good, but this one fits more with our color scheme and the theme that we already have. And I agree with my patrons. I like this one too. So as far as customizing the section header, what are we going to do here? Well, we have two labels, and we have custom fonts, and we have a transparent background so we can see the image behind it. So that's what we're going to do. That's what we're going for. Okay, so let's head into our project and see what we have to do to customize this TableView section header. Okay, so here we are in our project, and we're on the Activities View Controller. And this is the view controller that shows the days and activities that a person will be doing on their trip. So the first thing we want to do is we want to be able to create or add our custom section header, right? So let's go into the code and take a look here. Now down here, we have our extension, which has our UI TableView data source. And the way we're doing this now is we're populating the section header with the title and subtitle, and it's just one label. You know, as you can see here, we just return a string, right? But there's another function that we're going to use that will return a UI view, and we're going to use that UI view for our section header. So that's what we want to implement now. But unfortunately, this function isn't in the UI TableView data source. It's actually in the UI TableView delegate. So let's add that here. There it is there. And I'll show you which one it is. So I'm holding down Command. I'm going to right click on here. And if we scroll down here, these are all the functions that are in the delegate. The UI TableView delegate. So if we go down here, let's see if we can find it. And yeah, it's right here. View for header and section. And as you can see, it returns a UI view. And that's exactly what we want. We want to create our UI view the way we want it, and then we're going to return it from this function. So I'm just going to copy this guy right here, and let's go back. And I'm kind of replacing this. I'm not going to use this anymore. So let's just add it right here. Okay, we got title, view. This is the one we want, the one that returns the UI view. Okay, so how are we going to do this? Well, what we could do is we could just create it in code, and that might work better for some of you, where you just create a UI view, and then you add your labels to it, and then you format everything in code. And I do have an older video in which I show you how to do that. But in this project, I think what we're going to do is, since we're using storyboards already, we might as well take advantage of that, and we can create our UI view right in the storyboard. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to create a prototype cell right in the UI table view and just format that. So I just come to prototype cells and I click one, and it's going to add my prototype cell here for me. So let's zoom in on that. And we know we need a couple of labels, right? So we got one label there. And I'm just going to hold down Option and drag and create our second label. And we'll stick it over here. Yeah, right there. And this one, we'll format it right up against that margin. All right, that should work for us. Actually, I don't know why I'm dragging them, because what I'm going to do is I'm going to embed them in a stack view. So I'm going to come down here and put them in a stack view. There we go. And then I'm going to set up some constraints. So let's see, 0, and this will be 0. And then we have 0 there. And let's just make this 0. There we go. That looks good. Add the constraints, and everything's set. And let's just make sure our properties for the stack view are good. Fill and fill, I think that's going to work for us. The spacing, though, let's just use standard value. And what that's going to do is it's going to stretch out the labels here. Now, as you can see, if we click on this, what's a good thing to do is if you want to see like the borders of your labels without having to click on them, there is an option here. If we go to editor, where is it? Canvas. Yeah, show bounds, rectangles. So I can click on that. And then it's going to show, the label bounds, like the border, right? So as we can see, this one's bigger and this one's smaller. So let's click on our stack view and let's change the distribution here. Let's say fill equally. There we go. It gives each one 50%. Then I'm going to take this one and we want it to be right aligned. Okay, that looks good. So it's going to be our title. It's going to be our subtitle. And I think that's all we need for now. And let's create some outlets for it. But, in order to create outlets, we need a custom class first, right? So if we click on this TableView cell and we come to the class, we want to be able to select one from here. We only have one for our trips, but let's create another one for our section headers. And this is the way I organize my projects, just because every screen that I'm on, I want all the files that are related to it. That's just my own personal preference. So we're going to come here and we're going to add a new file. It's going to be a Cocoa Touch class, UI TableView cell. Okay, so yeah, that's what we want. And this will just be the header. There we go. Okay, let's create some space. And I'm just going to create a couple of outlets like right here. So we can come back to our storyboard. I'm going to click Option and then click on our header TableView cell class that we just created. And holding down Option and clicking on that just guarantees that it opens up the correct file that I want. Oh, you know what I just realized too? This actually isn't going to work because we haven't set this class as our custom class for the TableView cell. So we have to do that first. Header TableView cell. Just to let you know why I have to do that first. Because if I try to come in here and I try to create an outlet for this labels, it won't even take. It doesn't even give that option to even do that. So first I have to go to my cell, then I have to select our TableView header class that we just created, and now I can create outlets. You see how now it gives me the option to create the outlet. So I'm just going to call this title label. This will be my subtitle label. There we go. And then what I also like to do is create a function where I pass in all the data that this cell needs to populate itself. We don't need set selected right now, so I'm just going to delete that. So create a function, call it setup. This is what I do for all my TableView cells. It's just something that I've always done, and I'll probably continue to do until someone tells me there's a better way. So, okay. And what am I passing in here? Well, we have models for our days, right? So I'm just going to pass in the whole model. I'll call it model, and it is a day model. There we go. And once I have that, that has all the data that I need for these cells. And the reason why I like passing in the whole model is because if I expand this day model later on and add other fields that I'm going to put in this section header, then I don't have to change any of my parameters. So let's take the data from the model and populate our labels. All right, that should do it. Now let's implement this and see how it looks. Okay, I'm not returning anything right now, so this won't work. So the first thing I'm going to do is dequeue this cell that we just created. And, now that I think about it, I don't think we gave our cell an identifier, did we? Let's go and take a look. No, we didn't. Okay, so we need that. I'll just call it header cell. Okay, now we can dequeue it. And then now that I have this cell, I want to call that setup function on it, right? Let's create some more room here. So let's see, just to make this error go away, I'm going to return the cell, not the cell itself. What I'm actually returning, here, I'll show you, is the content view right here. So the content view is the UI view that's on the topmost level. Like if we go back here and look at our cell. So we have our header cell right here, and then this is the content view. So this is actually what I'm returning, is this content view. Okay, now I want to call cell.setup, right? But notice it doesn't recognize that function because it doesn't know that this cell is our header table view cell class that we just created. So what I have to do is cast it as that class, like that. And then it should recognize this function here. Yeah, there it is right there. And we want to pass in our day model. Well, we don't have a day model yet. So let's create that. And I'll just do it up here. Okay. Now, like this function right here, notice it passes in the section that you're on. So this also passes in the section. And if you look down here, this is how we got our model before, by just using that section that's passed in. So we're just going to do the same thing. We don't care about the title or subtitle. We just want to pass in the whole model. And it says it needs to be unwrapped first. Right now, day model could be nil, but not likely, because since we're in this function, we know this function is only called if there are day models. So we do have a day model, and it's coming directly from this data source here. That's where it's getting the count from, like right up here. So we know the day model does exist. So let's just fix this. We'll add a exclamation point. And we don't need the question mark. So let's fix that, because we're saying it does have a cell using this exclamation point right here. All right, good. Let's run it now and see how it looks. We have no section headers whatsoever. Can any of you guys guess what I did wrong? This is a common mistake I make a lot, even at work. So the problem is I never hooked up the delegate. Remember we added this delegate right here? So our class does conform to the delegate, but we're not telling the table view to use our class for its functions. So let's do that. Okay, and run it again. There we go. So there's our section headers. Doesn't quite look the way we want it to though, right? Because it looks like the text is actually getting cut off. It's still the old height that we had before, which I think is, I forget what the default height is for section headers, like 33 or something like that. So we want to increase the size of this section header. And here's one thing to note from Apple. When we look at their documentation for view for header and section, which is what we're using, and you look down here at the discussion, it says the returned object can be UI label or UI image view, something that inherits from UI view, as well as a custom view, which is what we're doing. This method only works correctly when height for header and section is also implemented. So that's what we need to use. Now we could just leave it the way it is, if you want to use a very, short header, but we want to increase the height of it. So we're going to implement that second function right there, height for header and section. And there it is right there, height for header and section. And what do we want for now? Let's just return 44. Okay, let's run it again and see how it looks. All right, awesome. That looks much better. So we're going to refactor this a little bit. Now I'm returning a hard-coded value of 44. And if we look at our storyboard, let's just make sure that it is 44. So what I'm going to do is come here, and I'm going to look at the size inspector, and I see here the height is 44. Okay, so that's fine. But what I want to do is, what if I change that height? What if I make it taller? So even if I come here, I use a custom height, and I set it to like, 55. Now, it got bigger down here on the storyboard, but when I run it, let's take a look. Still 44, right? Doesn't look any bigger than it did before. And this is actually, it's kind of hard to see. Well, let's do this too. One of the things that we need to do is we need to make it transparent so we can see the image behind it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come to the table view. And if you look at you want to go to the attributes inspector. So if you look at the background color here, you notice it's white. So let's change that to clear color. And then let's run it. That should show us a little bit better, how high the section header is. Yeah. So it's still 44. When I increase the size to 55, it didn't take because I have to change that function. Right here, I have to change this to 55. So while I'm developing and prototyping and designing, I don't want to have to keep changing this table view height. I want it to take whatever height it is in the storyboard. Here's something that we could do. We can dequeue it. We'll just get the cell like this. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to return the cell's height. I want to look at bounds. And then from there, I can look at the height property. Okay. Now, when I run it now, oh, what's it saying? Yeah, we could just, if it doesn't find the cell for some reason, then we can default it to 44. Whoops. Okay, so let's run it. And it should be 55. It should be higher this time. Okay, it is. It looks bigger now. But here's something to consider. Every time you run this, height for header and section, it's going to run for every header that it creates. And I don't want to have to dequeue that cell every single time because it's going to be the same height, right? Now, maybe I want to do that if I had different headers that were different heights. But for this app, all the section headers are going to be the same height. So I only want to do this one time and return that value that I get. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this out. And in viewDidLoad, that's where I'm going to dequeue the cell and store the height in a variable. So let's create our variable to hold our height. And I believe it returns a CG flow, right? All right, there we go. And we can default it to 0.0, just so it doesn't give us a hard time. So then we'll set section header height down here. And we'll say, no, we don't need the cell anymore. Let's create some more room here. Okay, we're dequeuing it. And from there, we should have a content view. And then we could just access the bounds and then the height. Yeah, it's failing. I think it's failing because it could be nil, right? Yeah, so we're going to use the coalesce operator. And, like I said, if we don't find something, then we'll just make it 0 because if there's no header, then don't show it. So it'll have a height of 0. And then down here, so we want to return that section height, section header height. Okay, and that should work just the same. So now when I change that height while I'm designing, I don't have to update the code. Okay, good. And I am going to do that. I'm going to go back. I'm going to change it back to 44. There we go. Now, the next thing I want to do is I want to be able to set the custom fonts for those two labels, right? We have a theme class that already defines a font in there. Yeah, right here, the main font name. So what I want to do is I want to create a couple more properties for these different fonts. And if we look at the mockup, let's take a look again here. So the font on the left is Avenir Next bold, and the one on the right is Avenir Next regular. So those are the two that I want to define. So let's create a couple properties for those. Okay, now I have to figure out what the actual string is that's used to represent that font. So here's what I'm going to do. When it comes to getting font names, the most reliable source that I've discovered, unless you guys know of a different way to do this, a more reliable way to do this, is to go right into FontBook. And FontBook's an app that we all have on our Macintoshes. So what you do is you find the font on the left there, and then you select which style you want, bold, regular, heavy. And then over on the right-hand side, you can just copy that PostScript name and use that in your code. And like I've said before in previous videos, when it comes to fonts and font names, if that PostScript name doesn't work, then try the full name, which is right below it. But we'll try the PostScript name first. Okay, so I'm going to open up FontBook. And I want to find Avenir. Avenir Next, this is the one I want. Okay, let's start with the regular. And I'm just going to copy this part right here and go into my Xcode. and put that in right here. And then we want the bold. So I'm going to the bold, copy this, and put right here. Now the thing with this font is I don't have to include a font file into Xcode project because it already knows about this font. Okay, now that I have my fonts, I can reference them in my TableView cell. So come back down here to the header TableView cell, and I'm going to set them in here. And this is the one I'm going to use right here. And for the name, we'll just get that from our theme. In the title label, that's going to be the bold one. And how big do I want it? I'm going to stick with 17. Okay, now let's set the subtitle font. I'm going to make this a little bit smaller. Make it 15. All right, let's see how that looks. All right, that looks good. We had the bold font and then the regular font, and it's using the style that we want. Now, it's kind of hard to read. You know, if I come down here, like where it's darker, I can barely see April 19th. So what we want to do, like in the mockup, is we want to fade that background image a little bit. So that's the last thing we have to do. So let's do that now. We'll go into our storyboard, and the background image is right here. And I think what I'll do is I'll just change the alpha to 0.5. There we go. And that should work. Yeah, that's much easier to read. If I come down here, I can still read April 19th and the word exploring. All right, great. So that's it for this video. So just remember there are two functions needed to create a custom section header. And that is the view for header and section, which returns a UI view. And then we have to specify the height. You know, if it's not going to be the default height, which is, I think is 33. So we can implement the height for header section and tell it how high we want it to be. And I showed you another way to do that too. If you're using storyboards, you can dequeue our prototype cell and figure out its height from there and just return that. And that way it allows you to play with the height and make it different heights without having to change the code. Okay, great guys. Keep climbing that big mountain and ascend to be a better developer every day. Like this video. If you enjoyed it, share it with others on social media. If you want to help out my channel, you can provide a translation for the title and description. Then that way, other people who speak your language will be able to find the video more easily. All right, thanks, guys.